co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, of People's History of Fake News. Please welcome back to the show, Danny Haiphong. Hey, Danny.
Hi, Jimmy. Good to be back with you.
Good to see you. Do we have... no, right? Yeah, no. No, so that's other. Okay. So we're going to jump right into this. So the great social media, so they're getting ready, they're banning TikTok, which I think is going to go into effect this Sunday. And so this is from CNN Business. The great social media migration, sudden influx of users, United States users, to a thing called Rednote that connects the Chinese and the Americans like never before. A Supreme Court justice as they ponder the future of TikTok, a growing number of American social media users have responded by moving to an unlikely alternative. How do you say that, Danny?
What? Oh, Little Red Book. Haiphong.
Okay, Haiphong. Okay, that's a hugely popular social media app in China. The app, which means Little Red Book, often shortened by U.S. users to Rednote, surged at the top 10 positions on Apple's U.S. App Store. That happened on Tuesday. It was founded in 2013. It's one of China's biggest social media platforms with 300 million users. It's described as China's answer to Instagram. It's become especially popular for sharing tips on travel, makeup, fashion. It's surging in popularity worldwide the same week that TikTok is potentially going down. By the way, we're on there, the Jimmy Dore Show. You can go Jimmy Dore Comedy, and it'll come up. So we're on there because they kicked us off TikTok again. So
wait. So you're allowed on the more Chinese one?
So that's the irony, is that
that's amazing.
I'm allowed to go on the one that's actually Chinese social media app, but I'm not allowed on the TikTok one. Okay, so here we go. More than 700,000 new users have joined. Wednesday, the hashtag TikTok refugee garnered 250 million views and 5.5 million comments. Many of the American users they had joined as an act of defiance against Washington's move on TikTok. Yeah, I did. This is so much better than TikTok, somebody claimed. Americans are coming here. So sorry you'll hate us, but I promise we'll do our best. The sudden migration of U.S. users to this Red Book has created an unlikely platform for Chinese and American users to interact with each other. That's the thing, right? Most Chinese users have warmly welcomed the newcomers, with some even sharing video tutorials to help the new TikTok refugees navigate the app. So it looks like this could be a big historic moment. Users are finding creative ways to transcend language barriers, navigate cultural differences, and coexist in fascinating ways. This community building happening in real time. So we've been fed a lot of propaganda, Danny. You know this in the United States. We've been fed propaganda that says Chinese are all communists and evil, and they don't respect rights, or so they're just like what I was taught as a kid about Russians, right? And they're saying it about Russians again, by the way. So when people are finding out is that, oh my God, Chinese people are just like us. They have the same wants and needs and desires. They have the same familiar needs. Also, their lives are way better than we've been taught in the United States by our propaganda in our government. In fact, here, let me play this quick video for you. This is looks like a Gen X guy, and here's what he's going to say about what he found out by going on Redbook.
Well, I got to tell you something. We have been fed so much bullshit. You really need to go and sign up for Rednote. Just go and peruse the site. It's mind-blowing. The kindness, the generosity that the Chinese people are showing to the Americans who come on there, the way they're welcoming them. Yes, they're asking them to follow the guidelines of their app, which is standard practice. But when you start looking at what you see on Rednote versus what the governments have been handing us for propaganda and bullshit, my God, man, I spent a couple hours just going through the site, and really it's worth the time for you to just sign up, go onto the site, and you don't even have to set up a full account to go and look. But like the amount of money that they have to spend on groceries, for example, is peanuts compared to what we pay here in Canada, and I'm sure the same in the US. It's like night and day. Their world there is so much better than the way they portray it. They're not a repressed people. They're intelligent. They're not what they try and tell us, that they are evil China, 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 as Trump would say. Go have a look. Seriously, you're going to get a rude awakening about the truth and the propaganda that we've been hand-fed for years, that China's our enemy. They're not our enemy. Our enemy are the people who sit in those fancy chairs in Congress and Senates and politicians, the rich, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, the people who hand us BS. I have to say that I got an education in the last 24 hours, just going through that site, watching various videos. Now, it's not TikTok. It's more of it's slightly different than TikTok, but it's good. And it's unbelievable to see how many people will welcome you. Go have a look. Take care, my friends. God bless. And let's put an end to the government's nonsense, both Canada, US, and around the world. China is not an evil place. China is not a place where they repress their citizens. I mean, yeah, there's things they can't do and things they can't say, but they live a healthy and prosperous life there. It's different. Go see for yourself. Give me your feedback when you're done. I'm curious to know what you think. Take care, my friends. All the best.
Now, Danny, let me bring you in because you've been on this show before, and there was always people in the comments saying that this guy's just a propagandist for China. So let me just give you a chance. Go ahead and respond to that.
Sure. Well, I don't want to say it, but I will say it. I mean, I told you so to those who were questioning me. I mean, I've been to China 4 times in the last 5 years, and everything that people are saying on Redbook right now, Jimmy, is what people say to me when I've been in China, whether it's in Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, the most propagandized region that the United States targets to try to label China this human rights catastrophe, or whether it's Beijing and Shanghai, the biggest cities in China. They say the same things. They say that they are building their own system. They're building a system that works for them. And they are actually shocked, just like Chinese users on Xiaohongshu are shocked when Americans tell them the things that they are going through about healthcare debt, about how much an ambulance costs, about how it's so difficult to buy a home, to even afford rent. This is shocking to them because they don't assume that the United States is going to be like this, and they assume that what happens in China should be just ordinarily what happens in the United States, because in China, you can take a high-speed rail train. We don't have that in the United States. In China, you're not going to go bankrupt if you need an ambulance. In China, if you want to take the subway, you're going to take a clean, a fast subway, and it costs, even in the most expensive city in China, in Shanghai, it's going to cost you 50 cents per trip, no matter how far you go. So that is just, it's always been the reality. But the really striking thing about this, Jimmy, is that Xiaohongshu has basically done what a lot of my work I've been attempting to do over the years has helped facilitate Americans' knowledge, and it's breaking through the propaganda barrier that the U.S. government has tried to impose on us in order to fuel a Cold War against China, all because the United States wants to take away our right. The government wants to take away our rights to use TikTok, which is a huge disaster for the United States, for the economy, for people's rights. In China, the ironic thing, Jimmy, is that in China, the U.S. TikTok, what you can use in the U.S. and Europe and the West, is not. You're not able to use that in China because they don't want that version of TikTok. They have Douyin and they have Xiaohongshu. They have other alternatives that they regulate, that they use for themselves, that are wildly popular, and they don't view TikTok as necessary for their people and their society. And so this is what's so ironic, is that TikTok is being banned in the United States, and people are mass migrating to a Chinese app, the one that you can use a US number for, and people in the United States are learning about China in the same way that I've learned about China, by going there, by seeing it, by traveling from east to west, north to south, and seeing what people are doing there to build a better society, a more prosperous society, and one that respects international law, multipolarity, and peace. It has its own problems, it has its own contradictions, but China says that they're going to address those for themselves, and they're going to do that without U.S. interference. And that is really all you can ask for in this moment when the United States is going scorched earth all around the world.
So now, if someone said, "Hey, what are the problems of the United States?" I would say the unbelievable explosion of income inequality, the capture of governments by corporations and billionaires, the lack of actual democracy, the imposition of oligarchy, people's inability to access healthcare in a way that doesn't bankrupt them, people's inability to keep up with inflation, the high housing costs, the high costs of education. People are basically in debt and serfs now, and it's really we have bigger income inequality since we got to go back to the times of the pharaohs. So there's a real this to me is the situation that you would find when a revolution happens. Now, those are that's what I would say the problems in the United States, which they're huge, right? We still won't give people health care, and we see our infrastructure falling apart when a fire happens in Los Angeles, in a place that they have fires all the time, and they're not ready for them. It took 45 minutes for a fire truck to get to the Pacific Palisades when that fire broke out. So what would you say is the problems? I mean, that's what two parties, right? So we have two parties in America, but it's really one party. It's the oligarchy party, right? It's the money party. So we have the illusion of democracy, we have the illusion of choice, and we have the illusion of two parties. What would they only have one party in China? What would be the problems?
Well, I'll just name three because I think it's so interesting. Oftentimes, when you say anything good about China, you're called an agent of the CPC, that you never criticize China. But really, you can just look at how the Chinese government talks about China and see that they also talk about problems, even in the state media. And you can clearly, and when you go to China, people will talk about this, there are three critical problems that China is trying to address right now. One is corruption. There's a huge anti-corruption campaign within the Communist Party of China right now. There have been thousands upon thousands of arrests, of clamping down on those that have taken bribes, that have gotten rich, that have done bad by people in order to advance themselves wherever they are in China under the banner of the party. So that is happening, and that has been very successful, but it continues to happen because it continues to be a problem. That is something that is very difficult to completely eliminate. Number two, they also have income inequality in China.
Can I just see in America here that almost never happens, right? You get Joe Biden giving people blanket pardons. You get Nancy Pelosi, who's obviously doing insider trading, and they pass laws that make that stuff legal. So you actually have less corruption, it seems, in China than you do in the United States. To me, just from an outsider.
100%. The anti-corruption campaign works, Jimmy. There have been so many bankers, so many party members, so many people that have violated the laws, the rules, the codes of what it means to follow the rule of law in China and to serve the people. Those folks have been brought to justice. Of course, there's still many out there still in China that they are trying to clamp down on, but it still has happened. And so when we get to this next problem, income inequality, China got really, really, really rich really, really, really fast. And they did it by opening up their economy. That led to a certain level of inequality between those that benefited the most and those that benefited less. Everyone's standard of living, just look at the graphs, look at what the UN says about poverty alleviation, look at the income graphs. You can see that everyone in China over the last 40 years has had their standard of living increase. But it has not been equal, of course. And so right now, China is trying to address common prosperity. They are trying to address the problem of what it means to have rich people that have more money, maybe more wealth than those who do not. And that is the second problem. The third problem, of course, that many people know about is the environment. Massive industrialization, rapid industrialization led to pollution, smog, and difficult living conditions in some of the biggest and most industrialized cities. That problem is quickly becoming one that is close to being solved because of China's massive investments. I mean, I know you're in California, Jimmy. I know they talk a lot about renewable energy there. I'm on the East Coast, where we're in the coastal parts of the United States. They talk a lot about renewable energy, solar panels, windmills, those kind of things. In China, they invest so much in this to the point where 100% of the buses are electric, 70% of the cars are electric, 47,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, and pollution has reduced dramatically to the point where you have former diplomats like Eric Solheim, for example, who can go to China now. He's been traveling to China for decades. He says, in 1990s, he couldn't run in Beijing without a mask and without, feeling like he was going to collapse from the pollution. Now the skies are blue and the air is much more clean to breathe because of this investment. So China has that problem still, though, because they're still a massively industrializing country that uses a lot of coal. So these are the issues that China, just three of them, that China still is needing to address. But the difference, Jimmy, and I think this is what people are learning on Little Red Book, Xiaoheng Shu, is that they are addressing it. They are actually attempting to resolve problems that are massively difficult to address in a world situation that we find ourselves in.
So, is there a homeless problem in China?
Well, Jimmy, in China, there are people who, it's a much different kind of society. So if people know the layout of China and its history, they know it used to be one of the poorest countries in the world, and most of the population was rural. So most people lived in the countryside, most people lived on their land. When industrialization happened, a lot of people moved into the cities to work. The United States corporate media loves to propagandize that, oh, these people are just, they're just moving to the cities, being forced there and forced to work. No. People wanted to go there to the cities because they wanted to make more money, because you can make more money working in a factory than you can, selling crops in the countryside. So when that happened, there was, of course, an imbalance. China had to create a housing system called Hoku. And what China did, though, was they ensured that people who came from the countryside always had their land. They never took away their land. They never said, you can't have your land anymore. The land, especially in the rural areas, is people's property. So people always have a place to go back to. China's homeless problem is very, very small. And to someone from the United States, it probably looks like zero. Why? Because China does not believe in the idea of sleeping rough, like they say in the UK or in the United States, people who sleep outside, street homeless. You will not find that in China because China does have a relatively robust social services system, and they encourage people who are migrating from the rural areas into the cities, either one, to canteen with factories, which is a very common thing. A lot of Chinese factories will put people up for their jobs, or they encourage people to travel back and travel back to the countryside during Spring Festival, during the off seasons when they're not working in the cities, and to live in the countryside. But until they can, this is another problem I didn't talk about, Jimmy, until there is an even level of development between the rural areas and the urban areas, a very difficult task, but one that is China is very committed to. That problem will not 100% go away. But truthfully, there is not a homelessness problem in China. It is something that exists, but it's very small. It's nothing to the level of the United States. What was the increase this year, Jimmy? 24%, 18%? I forget what the number is. Something astronomical in the last year alone. Homelessness rose under the Biden administration. Every year under the Biden administration, it has risen. That is something that would be unacceptable in China. If the homelessness rate was going up every single year, Xi Jinping, all the way down to the lowest levels of government, their heads would be rolling. They would not be in power anymore. That is just something that isn't acceptable. People in China, when I go there, they are shocked. They ask me, it's like, this is very scary that you have people sleeping outside, very scary that you have people who have nothing, no help, no assistance, that they're struggling with their mental health. Nobody's trying to help them. There's no resources. That's something that is very shocking, I think, in China. And Xiaoheng Shu, again, is showing that. I think we're probably going to see a lot of videos come up on that platform from Americans, and Chinese users be very shocked.
Well, that was the thing that I remember one of the first times we talked. I was saying this one party rule, it's got to be horrible, and one party rule. Of course, we have the same thing here in the United States, basically, and it's oligarchy rule, and the both parties agree on the most horrible of things. But you pointed out to me that if there's a problem, now you know who to blame. In America, they're doing it right now at the LA fires, right? That Jen Psaki's doing videos on MSNBC and blaming Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And meanwhile, it's the Governor Newsom and Karen Bass who are in charge. And then we have people going on talk shows saying it's not their fault. They're doing a great job. It's not so. But in China, there's only one party to blame. And so consequently, people do get held accountable for things and heads do roll, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, even during COVID, right? Before we knew what COVID-19, all of that was, during the initial period in Wuhan, a lot of local officials were sacked, not because they necessarily did something terribly wrong, but because something went wrong. And, during that early novel coronavirus period, and they immediately took action and said, well, your leadership wasn't quick enough. You didn't respond quick enough. You're gone. And this is something that happens all the time, especially at the local level, because this is where corruption in China, the anti-corruption campaign, really hones in on, because it's much easier than at the central government level, at the higher levels of government, provincial, et cetera. It's a lot easier to check people than at the very lowest level, where perhaps you are a single person or maybe a few people who's in charge of a village or maybe a township or whatever it is. It's a lot easier to do corruption there than it is at the highest levels, where you have to abide by stricter rules, and you have far more people looking over your shoulder saying, hey, what's going on, if things don't go right, especially when you deal with bigger policies rather than just implementing them. And you're creating them at the higher level. So that's where a lot of the heads roll, actually, in the local level, because it's much easier to be corrupt at that level in China. And that's what most people will talk about when they talk about corruption. But still, this corruption doesn't reach the level, and I'm glad that you talked about the two-party system, Jimmy, because a lot of people who worship the two-party system in the United States, who are Democrat, Republican, this is the best way, this is the best system, they don't even they love their choices, but then they don't even champion, well, what about the European systems? Don't you love them? They're parliamentary. They have, some of them even have 4, 5, 6. Look at Germany. Germany's full of parties, and they seem to be collapsing too. But in the United States, you have two parties, as you said, one oligarchy controlling it. In China, people assume that because you have one party, you essentially have an oligarchy controlling it. But really, that one party has a hugely robust system that allows for a lot of top-down and bottom-up communication, which is why it works so efficiently. Because if you didn't have quick decision-making at the top and the ability for people at the bottom to have their say and give their service to the government, understand what it is, and give their contributions, then that system wouldn't work. That system would not be as efficient. China would not be able to alleviate poverty. China would not be able to make quick decisions when needed. They wouldn't be able to industrialize so fast. You need that both top-down and bottom-up communication, people talking to each other, giving recommendations at the bottom, even voting at the village level, at the municipal level. And then you need people at the top who are chosen from the bottom levels to then implement policy that reflects the interests of the people. But if China had a party, if the Communist Party of China began to act like the United States' political system, the Communist Party of China would be no more. So we have to understand that Chinese people are very, very, very involved. They're very opinionated. If they are not getting what they want, we've seen this at the local level over and over and over again. If they're not getting what they want or that they need, there's going to be new leadership there. And that's what makes the party so flexible. It's why it's been so resilient. And it's why the United States can't stand it, because the United States wants to overthrow it. The United States doesn't want a government that can be this efficient, that can grow in this way, and that can compete, because that means the United States will have to compete itself. And you see what's happening here, Jimmy. The United States economy is in shambles. The two-party system is utterly corrupt, and the United States is on a precipitous decline.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Kurt, go ahead.
Because I always make jokes about this. So you're saying they don't use TikTok because they got all the spy information from that balloon they sent, basically, is what I'm hearing. But why? Like, why do we make our, and this is like a dumb joke I say, but, and just correct any parts of what I'm saying is dumb here, but like, why do they make our shoes and phones and viruses for us if we're enemies with China? I hear people talk bad. When people trash China, they'll say the CCP, like how I always say Zionist, because I don't blame Judaism for what Israel does. I say Zionist, and I don't hear people say they don't like Chinese people. Like, I don't like the CCP, and that's like the kind of way of saying it. But we do a lot of trade with them. So I'm just bewildered. Like, we're back in Wuhan, making viruses again, as far as I know. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, we are.
So how are they our enemy, but we do that there? That I like. No one's ever really explained to me how that works.
Well, the United States had a plan for China. The plan was when the United States normalized with China, that it would push China to become a so-called Western-style democracy. That by integrating China into the world market, dividing it from the Soviet Union, essentially creating a huge rift in the socialist bloc, that this would be the downfall of not just the Soviet Union, but also China in China's model of socialism. This was ultimately the plan. The problem is that China didn't want to play ball in that way. So what China did was it said, yes, we want to be part of the world economy. We don't want to be sanctioned. That's what would have been the reality for China, that China wasn't recognized, the People's Republic of China, from 1949 to 1971 at the United Nations because the United States wouldn't allow it. The Republic of China, based in what was in Formosa, now Taiwan, was recognized as the government of China, even though they were the loser nationalist party that got kicked out for being far too amenable to Japanese and US empire. So when this happened, China said, we are going to be part of the world economy. We have a lot of workers and laborers here. We can develop ourselves and you can make massive profits because our labor is going to be very cheap because we're very poor here. But we are not going to allow you to keep us poor. We're not going to let you turn us into some kind of neo-colony, which is what most of the global South ended up becoming during the age of U.S. What is it called? The New American Century, the IMF, all of that.
Japan took them down. Yeah,
this is exactly what happened, and China was very aware that this was going to be the plan. So what they did is said, well, no, we will open up, but it's going to have to be fair. We're going. This is what you hear it all the time, Kurt, Jimmy. You hear it all the time. What does Mike Pompeo? What does Marco Rubio? What do they always say? China's stealing our things. China is stealing our ideas, our patents, all this. No, what China said was, if you enter into a venture with our companies get to learn and understand what you are doing. This is just business. In order for you to use our capital, our labor, whatever it is, in order to reap your side of the profits, well, we want to learn. We want to understand what's going on. So they do. They learn. But it's still up to the Chinese people to do it better. It's still up to the Chinese people to compete and to form their own businesses. So that's what happened. And then China ended up doing better. And China ended up building businesses and companies in industries and moving fast. And now the United States is falling behind in so many different industries. You see this in electric vehicles. The United States is way
They have flying
behind.
cars in China now.
Yeah,
China has flying cars. Are you joking?
Yeah,
I went there,
China-
dude. I went there. You're right about the homeless thing. At the time, this is just before Trump got in, and they kind of liked him, by the way, when I was there, because he's like a businessman. That's how what Chinese people.
Trump in China. Yes.
Yeah, they liked that. They had no problem with anything the way liberals here talk about Trump. But the thing I noticed, and I was curious about, because a lot of people just always wore masks from the bird flu days. And I used to make a joke about this when I got back. And I was like, this is like being in Blade Runner, like I went to the future. And sure enough, it was the future, except I guess we don't have flying cars like China, just mask people. So that COVID response, I saw videos of people howling out of their, I know Chinese like their overall government. When they poll them, they tend to like the top and be mad at local government when they're mad, which I'm all for that, by the way. But with the COVID, like here, it was a nightmare, and Canada was a nightmare, okay? And I was the impression that like they had poured a lot of Chinese to Canada to help write that, because WEF liked the control mechanism of people being on lockdown and stuff. But like I said, I only know what I heard here. So how do you think they handled COVID? Because here, I wasn't real thrilled with how they handled it.
Well, in China, when I've been there, and I'll just speak briefly on this and then conclude my point. In China, I think there were a lot of frustrations over time because it's hard to lock down, it's hard to close the economies. I know in Shanghai, the frustrations were probably the highest. But truthfully, in China, the biggest priority and concern, regardless of what our feelings may be about the virus itself and what happened here and what happened especially in the West, the biggest concern was ensuring that like older people and things like that, and people like that, vulnerable people, didn't die. So people were actually, even though they knew, no one's happy about the massive inconvenience and the problems that occurred from it. Overall, I think they supported the government and still do. But you know what? China's response, one of the things, even though I don't think there could be a good response to something like this, the the fact is that China was able to recover and bounce back far faster than anyone else, and I think the big reason for that was the government was ready and able and willing to ensure that people's livelihoods were not decimated through the crisis. And that's a big difference from the United States, where we saw so many people lose their jobs, their homes, their businesses, whatever it may be, because of the fact that the government said, okay, we're going to respond to this, but guess what? You're SHIT out of luck once it happens and after the fact. And, I don't think we've actually ever recovered from that economic crisis, contrary to what the Biden administration says. So, overall, though, China has learned how to do business from the capitalist market, from the US dominated capitalist market. And it ended up building an economy through various industries that, because it has a government, and people think this is bad, Marco Rubio, these guys, who knows what Donald Trump will say when he's finally in office, but it's unfair, right? Janet Yellen, it's unfair. Government subsidies. This is exactly what the United States did during World War II to ensure that the United States didn't end up in a Great Depression that lasted 30, 40, 50 years. Like, that's what would have happened in the United States if the US government didn't say, we're going to pump our military industrial complex full of money, and we're going to allow that to ricochet all across the industries in the United States, the industrial heartland, and that will build jobs, and that will build what people thought was a middle class at that time. China essentially has done the same thing with its own characteristics, and now companies like BYD, and now its car industry, and now industries across the board just lead everything. 37 out of the 44 most advanced technologies are being led by China. And the semiconductor industry, even though it's still behind technically to Taiwan and all of that, it's going to win that race eventually too, if the United States keeps shooting itself in the foot like it's doing with TikTok. If the United States bans TikTok, not only will Xiaohongshu be this huge outlet for people to learn about China, but I think that there will be a massive amounts of unrest and discontent in the United States that will only make people more curious about China, and also make people more furious at the government, more than they already are. So Donald Trump, I think, he's already thinking twice about this. He better think 2, 3, 4, 5 times about it before going through with it, because it would be a disaster for his administration.
Well, Danny, I have a million more questions to ask you about, but we ran out of time. We have to get to our next guest. I want to say thanks for coming on. It's always informative to have you on. I need to know way more about China than I know.
Let's go, Jimmy. Let's go.
I wouldn't mind. Well, you know what? Look how pretty the city is. Watch. Turn.
What city is that?
I don't know what city that is, but it's wow. It looks fantastic. Look at that city. Anyway, so we got Danny muted. Go ahead. You could go ahead. Danny, what city is that?
Yes.
Shanghai.
What is it?
I went played there. That was a good city. It was like New York. They had a Ben's, the same pizza place by the cellar. They had a location in Shanghai.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't have any bad food when I was there. I had it was actually hard to get Chinese food. I got hot pot. That's all we could get, really. And everything else was like pretty high-end stuff that I got.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful city. The Bund is beautiful. The Huangpu River, you can ride on a boat. It's a really beautiful place. Especially at night, there's light shows.
It looks kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's massively packed every night. Every single night you go to the Bund, there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the middle of that square.
Let me just
by the river.
Before I say goodbye and we bring on Max Blumenthal, this guy Nathaniel says, "Have fun under constant video, social, and economic surveillance. If that's the
Yeah.
price you're willing to pay for a comfortable life, you should probably move there. You don't deserve a constitutional republic. And this guy says, sounds like being on Facebook.
What? I live in that now.
I live in that now.
Oh, when I went to China, I didn't think I lived in that, and I was like, in the future, I will. But you know, even that social credit system that
They're-
people trash, it's not like here the way it would be done. Their cops don't have guns, okay?
Yeah.
So people that break the, you know, Ari Shaffir was out there when they had that sewer oil street noodle, you couldn't eat street noodles. So how are you going to bust those crimes? That's why they started doing that the most. You know, like you'll hear that MMA guy, I think it was pretty screwed up how they did him, but I've already seen 20 of those here in America. I can't even point at China and go, oh, we don't do that. We do it like worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right, we got to run, but Danny, thank you so much again. We'd love to talk. I mean, I don't want to talk about this for another half hour, but we got to go. Everybody, check out Danny Haiphong Show on YouTube. It's doing really well. Always great to see you, Danny. Take care, brother.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Take care.
Bye, Danny.
Okay,
Bye, Kurt.
now